Thank you so much, members, for staying with me on this bill throughout this entire session to include this morning. Now, let me just tell you how we got here. It's just really as simple as this. I understand all the drama about the amendment. I withdrew the amendment, took the amendment off. It doesn't, well, this is what it does without the amendment. If you look on page 2, my friends, it says, notwithstanding subsection A or B, a peace officer or any other person may not, without a warrant, arrest an offender who commits one or more offenses punishable by a fine only, other than an offense under section 22.01A2. I believe that deals with family violence, or 3, or 49.02, the penal code, which deals with assault, and chapter 106 in the alcohol beverage code. And yesterday I added Class C voyeurism. And then it goes on to read, unless the officer or person has probable cause to believe. The person that is stopped in this scenario, the situation is already a Class C misdemeanor. What this bill is trying to accomplish is to limit arrest and detention on fine-only Class C misdemeanors. Now, it goes on to read on page 2. Failure to arrest the offender creates a clear and immediate danger to the offender or the public. Failure to arrest the offender will allow a continued breach of the public peace, or, and I think this has become the next flashing point, or the offender will not appear in court in accordance with the citation. That is what we passed yesterday, and it was in some of the same language I had this morning. Now, how do you get into that situation? Real quick. So, if someone is pulled aside by law enforcement, failure to change signal, failure to signal, changing lanes, and the officer asks for their identification, and maybe they left their identification at home. And then let's say the officer says, well, what is your name? And the officer, the justice involved person says, my name is James White.
Mr. Speaker?
Let me just finish with this, just a little bit. My name is James White. And then the officer returns to his vehicle to authenticate that I am James White, maybe with my address and date of birth. And that doesn't come up in the officer's vehicle, in his computer, in his vehicle. Along with some other situations, if you cannot be identified appropriately with probable cause, evidentiary standard, the officer has the discretion to say the offender will not appear in court in accordance with the citation. Now, before I take questions from the nice lady at the back mic, I will say this here. How did we get here? And it's important to understand this. Can I get order? And this is how we, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this is how we get here. Here we are at 8:51 p.m. My wife is back home. She's a school teacher. She probably had to take some kids home after the theater practice. And maybe she makes a mistake and she changes lanes going back home, and she changes lanes without signaling. I don't want to be on the House floor and get a call that my wife is in the Tyler County Jail, and you shouldn't want your wives in that position either, because The officer took the discretion to carry her down to the jailhouse. That's what this bill is about. So I'll tell my friends that have their concerns, I have stripped the amendment. The amendment is stripped. That's what this bill is about. Take questions from the back mic.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for questions?
I yield.
Gentleman yield for questions. Gentleman yields.
Okay.
Chairman White, I just want to get some clarification because this is the bill that we heard in the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, and I wanted to make sure that we understand the intent behind this bill. So on page 2, which you went over.
Yes, ma'am.
Page 2, section C, you're talking about whether or not an officer can arrest somebody for a fine only offense. And one of the sections was section 3. My question is, in order to do that, what is the standard for an officer that they have to reach? What's the threshold that they have to reach in order to exercise that option?
Probable cause.
Probable cause. So it's not like a hunch.
Absolutely.
They have to have probable cause in order to arrest somebody. It's okay. So is it probable cause to believe, or is it actual probable cause? Is
Articulable facts.
Okay, so it's not to believe. The believe is that in there for grammatical purposes? Is not to emphasize the intent, because what you expect out of this bill is actual probable cause.
Yes.
Okay, so that even though the reading says probable cause to believe that the person may not appear, the intent behind that is that you have to prove this with probable cause. The threshold is having probable cause.
Yes.
All right, and so that is what differentiates the amendment in this actual section of the bill, because
Absolutely.
This is a higher standard.
Absolutely.
This is a higher standard. So let me ask you some questions, because there has been concerns about what does it mean that what is the officer looking for when they're thinking about they may not appear in court in accordance with the citation. And I think this has something to do with their ID, which you were just trying to explain.
Well, or just simply being able to simply identify, simply that they can be sure that the person that they're talking to is actually the person that's standing in front of them.
Okay, so
that they're engaged with. Yes,
so
ma'am.
the concern is, how is that? Because that seems subjective to somebody, to other people. So is there like some objective factors that would be considered by law enforcement?
Yeah. And Chairwoman, I would say they can already do this now.
Okay.
Okay. So again, let's say it's 11 p.m. at night. I need to run out to go get a jug of milk. I'm in a rush. I may grab my billfold with the money in it, but I may not have. Mistakenly, I didn't take my ID. I'm pulled over on a fine-only misdemeanor. Okay. Evidently, it becomes to the fact that I don't have my identification with me, and I say, "Hey, look." The officer says, "Well, who are you?" My name is James White. I live here. My date of birth is 17/16/64. They go back to their vehicle. They run it through their computer. They find out that I am actually James White, 7/16/1964, and they can definitely identify me. If the officer still wants to ticket me, he can ticket me, but as far as the level of probable cause that I will not appear in court in accordance with the citation is not there, because he can identify that I'm the person and that I will appear in court with that citation.
Okay, so I think that what people have been articulating is that they're concerned that an officer can just make this determination that you will not appear in court. But again, you said you have to have probable cause.
Yes.
In order to believe that offender will not appear in court.
Yeah, it can't be. You just can't. It can't be a feel.
Okay.
I feel like it. Absolutely.
Right. And does it apply to all fine-only offenses, or just these offenses under 2117, 2201, or 4902?
It would be just those. It would be just in that engagement with the officer.
Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's not a 2117 offense. It could be,
Absolutely.
okay, it could be any offense.
Right. Because the point is here, if you read how the sentence is constructed, they can do the offense under Section 22.01A2. They can, or 3. They can do the offense under 49.02 Penal Code, and they can do the offense under Chapter 106 of the Alcoholic Beverage Code.
Okay. All right. I think that what the concern, again, is that the offender will not appear is subjective, and there's a lack of trust in law enforcement's decisions on how that would look.
Okay, and Madam Chair, I'm telling you right now, and of course you know this, with the purpose of this bill, okay, is to stop that subjectiveness. And the point is right now we have 50,000 warrantless, fine-only misdemeanor arrests now and detentions now, okay? So...
And your purpose is to eliminate that.
Or at least
reduce
to limit it.
Right. So,
Yes.
Mr. Speaker?
Ms. Collier, for what purpose?
I move to have the comments, the exchange between Chairman White and myself, and all the comments on the discussion of House Bill 2754 reduced to writing and placed in the journal for purposes of legislative intent.
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion is adopted.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Mr. Gutierrez, for what purpose?
For a question.
Gentleman yield for question.
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields.
Here's our problem, Chairman.
Yes, sir.
The situation is this, and I'm going to couch this in the terms of what happens during the course of a criminal proceeding. Let's take a DWI. You have a reasonable suspicion to make a stop. Someone was maybe weaving. So the officer forms a reasonable suspicion to make the stop. You understand that, right?
I'm listening.
And I know that you're the chair of this committee.
I'm listening.
Okay, you're listening. Now, then, what arises out of that reasonable suspicion is sometimes if they do a field sobriety test, there's bloodshot eyes, there's watery eyes, there's people that cannot do the walk and turn and so on. And those are elements of what make up probable cause of a crime that has happened right then and there. Not about a crime that's happened that may or may not happen into the future. Probable cause is exactly that. It's not about stopping some potentiality of a crime into the future. And that's where the subjectivity comes in. Do you understand what we're trying to say and what the concern is? I mean, can you address that?
I'm listening.
Well, maybe you can address that, because the potentiality of a crime, well, that's not
No,
American.
I'm not talking about the potentiality of the crime. Mm-hmm. Could I just share something with you, sure. Representative Gutierrez?
Yes, sir.
When I think about this bill in a very simplest standpoint, I think about the encounter Miss Sandra Bland had in Waller County. And I think about it in the context of this bill. And in the context of this bill, if the procedures were followed that afternoon in Prairie View, Sandra Bland would not have been in the Waller County Jail, and she would not have passed away in the Waller County Jail. That's the standard that I'm looking at in this instance, and that's the standard that I'm taking in this scenario.
And Representative, I'll tell you this. I'll submit this to you. You and I are both people of color.
Yes.
And there has existed in this state of Texas, driving while black. There has been existed in the state of Texas the ramifications of SB 4, and all of those things are what concern us. And we feel that what's going to happen in this legislation is exactly the opposite of what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. And you have the opportunity to vote for or against it. Move passage.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. White has moved passage. All those, I'm sorry, it's third reading, final passage. It's a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Wu voting aye. Mr. Middleton voting aye. Mr. Frullo voting no. There being 55 ayes and 88 nays, the bill fails to pass.